Hey everybody! Today we're at Fort Monroe, Virginia, and I'm really thrilled to be able to show you a little bit of Fort Monroe because it's truly one of my favorite places in our region. And it's a good example of why our area is often referred to as Hampton Roads, because here we are where three rivers converge into the Chesapeake Bay. And this is a place of historical significance. It dates back to the early 19th century, and it also has a lot of personal nostalgia or sentimental value to me. My dad, who was an Army officer, was stationed here when it was an active fort twice in the early 1970s, and then again in 1979 until his retirement in '84. And I even worked here one summer when I was a sweet young thing in college, and spent a lot of time eating lunch along the seawall and watching all the activities. And we're standing in the gazebo in the middle of the field in front of the Chamberlain Hotel.
Which is that big building there.
Well, it's more than a big building. It was again back to the early 18th century, or maybe it was late 18th. No, I guess it would be the late 19th century. It was a resort. The natural spring water was believed to have healing powers, so people came here to vacation because of the benefits of the spring water. That hotel burned down, and then I think the structure you see behind us was built sometime later in the early 20th century, and it continued to be a hotel till, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or so. Now it's a retirement community. But back in 1980, it was the site of my senior prom.
Huh.
And I love walking down the steps and having a view of the waterways and all the activities. And when I was a little girl, we would come out here in the summers for outdoor concerts on Thursday nights by the Army Band, and that was a good time. I remember one time we were enjoying the music when a submarine was in the bay, and the entire audience got up and walked.
To give you some perspective, across the harbor is the Norfolk Naval Base, which is where a lot of the aircraft carriers are tied up.
Yeah, we could obviously we could see it, but it was cool. But today we're here for a holiday home tour.
Yeah, it's kind of chilly. If you're wondering where the Spyder's at, it's home in the garage where it has more sense than we do. Say something.
Oh, I've always wanted to visit this house. It's gorgeous.
Now, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to video in all the homes. This is not a private residence. This is an event home being used for an event, even though it's the former general's home. But the rest of the homes are private residences, and we cannot film in those. Already fooling around with another guy, huh? Yeah. You're a sucker for guys in the military uniform.
I am.
Yeah. So why is Fort Monroe even a thing? What's the purpose of Fort Monroe? It is part of a coastal defense system that was built in the mid-1800s. Matter of fact, Robert E. Lee was actually stationed here before that unpleasantness between the North and the South in the 1860s. The point of the fort would be this waterway, which is part of the Hampton Roads Harbor. An opposing force would have to take boats, then come ashore here, and then maneuver across this piece of land, then get across this moat and then attack this fortification right here and come up and over top of that. It'd be really tricky to do because the way the fortification's built, every point on the fortification can be fired upon by another point in the fortification. So it's very interesting design. And I'm far from being a military historian or a tactical expert, but I think the concept of air power rendered fortifications like this pretty much obsolete. But it's still a great piece of history. You can see here that anybody who would be opposing trying to get up on top of that wall in the distance could be fired upon by people from this angle over here. So there's no place where you cannot defend the wall. Very intimidating defensive system.
So Miriam, my love, since this is your area of expertise, why don't you tell everybody what's going on with the fort nowadays here at Fort Monroe?
Well, for years and years and years, Fort Monroe was the home of the Training and Doctrine Command for the U.S. Army. And at least twice it was on the list that Congress proposed of military installations to be closed. And the reason that it was saved from that for a period of time was because there is ordnance buried in the what would you the berms?
The berms, yes.
The berms on the perimeter of Fort Monroe. So the thought was it was hazardous and it would be very expensive to dig all that up. Plus, just wanting to maintain the historical significance. However, finally the Army lost that battle, and in 2011, Fort Monroe was closed as an active Army post, and its operation was moved to Fort Eustis up in the Yorktown area, Newport News, Yorktown area. So there's been a huge debate about what to do with the property. Finally, it was designated a national monument. There is a movement for it to become a national park, which would enable it to have greater federal support, but that hasn't been successful yet. So there's so much history here. Robert E. Lee was stationed here early in his career. This site has historical significance because it was actually occupied by Union soldiers during the Civil War. The first president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, was imprisoned here. I think Edgar Allan Poe actually spent some time here when he was in the military.
Yes.
And what's interesting too is during the Civil War, some slaves in the local area turned themselves in and were considered contraband of the war, and they were actually able to obtain their freedom at Fort Monroe. And once word of that got out, others followed naturally. So it's just very interesting, all the history here. Fort Monroe, the signage says Freedom's Fortress, because its strategic location when it was built in 1834 was very important for what was then a very new nation. And I don't know where you could find a moat anywhere else in the United States. Are you aware of any other?
A lot of similar coastal fortifications that are like this up and down the East Coast. I believe that Fort Sumter has a similar design.
Okay.
You may recall that Fort Sumter was that place where South Carolina fired on it and started that whole Civil War stuff. And they're up and down the East Coast. These were designed as coastal fortifications, and as they became obsolete for that purpose, they were repurposed for training and indoctrination. And as that mission was consolidated, they no longer needed this facility. And it's just great that they're able to not turn it into condos, 7-Eleven, strip malls, and Walmart, and actually turn it into a historical place.
I hope so. Hope it always stays that way.
Yeah, it's just too beautiful. And technically, it's an island. You have to cross a bridge to get here. 'cause it's totally separated from the mainland of the peninsula,
Hampton,
the
or
city of
Phoebus,
the city of Hampton, the small town of Phoebus, which is where we're located. So,
Yep.
oh, we have a Civil War reenactor.
Cool. Getting into his 21st century vehicle.
Yes.
Behind us is the Casemate Museum inside the fort itself, inside the central fort. If you're ever over here, I strongly recommend you take in the Casemate Museum. It's free, and you're right across the street from where Robert E. Lee served before the Civil War, where he actually was an engineer. If memory serves, he helped design this fortification.
Or oversaw the construction of it.
Oversaw the construction. Well, close enough to being the same thing.
Yeah.
Of course, you know that no visit to a historical place is complete without visiting a craft brew pub, which they have here at Fort Monroe. And this is the Ouzelfinch Craft Brewery, and I'm not exactly sure what that thing is. Some sort of mythological bird, and here's a little bit of a story behind it. So we walked around and now we're thirsty. We're going to go inside and have us a pint.
Well, guys, that's going to pretty much conclude this video of our tour of Fort Monroe. Sorry we couldn't go into some of the houses because, well, they're still private residences and they didn't allow any videotaping. But hope you get a kind of a feel for what Fort Monroe has to offer. So I'm getting ready to sneak out and do some Christmas shopping. Miriam thinks I'm off to the hardware store to buy some stuff for the house, but I lied. So, shh. See you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.